Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this Thursday afternoon. I'm incredibly excited for today, and not because of basketball, but because the football season has finally started. And if you guys are interested in football and you guys like basketball too, for those of you guys who like basketball and are also interested in football, that's what I meant to say, excuse me. We also have several other sports podcasts. We have fantasy football podcasts, we have two football podcasts, and we have a sports podcast. I'm sure every single one of those podcasts is going to be covering their opinions on the game that's going to happen tonight. So if you guys are interested in that, I'd recommend listening to their podcasts. Kenneth, Manny, and TJ, they all do a really good job in being hosts like myself. And, they cover the sport that we all love, which is football. So I'm very excited for tonight. Hopefully my late night class gets canceled so that way I'll be able to actually see the entirety of the first game. We'll see how that works. But aside from that, let's stop talking about the NFL. Let's talk about basketball. The first segment isn't going to be about NBA basketball. It's going to be about the WNBA because recently the WNBA had just released its power rankings. So we are going to go ahead and take a look at the power rankings for the WNBA and where they're standing at right now, and as well as some mid-season notes that I have, my opinions on all those teams and things like that. Then in the second segment, I'm going to talk about how the 76ers are they're seriously considering going over to relocating over to New Jersey after this recent news just dropped. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about that and my opinions on that and all that stuff. And then in the third segment, I'm going to talk about how how the Bucks quite possibly had the most underrated move in the entire offseason, and no one's been talking about it. So I just wanted to go ahead and talk about it because I didn't really realize this until a little bit later, and I just felt might as well go ahead and talk about it. And then in the fourth segment, the fourth segment's going to be a little bit more of a I think it's a more of a fun segment where I'm going to talk about I'm going to look at this article that sort of tries to explain why Shaq doesn't like Rudy Gobert, and I'm going to sort of weigh in my opinions on, why he doesn't like him and things of that nature, because it is a running joke in the NBA right now. I just wanted to do that because I'm really curious as to why the reasons as to why Shaq doesn't like Rudy. I'm very curious as to what they could be. And then we also have the fifth segment where I talk about I've been doing a list where I talk about the players who I feel didn't really deserve to win an MVP in a specific season. So I'm just going to continue on with that list. If you want to know who I'm going to do in this fifth segment, then you just have to wait until the end of the fourth segment for me to reveal that. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Before I begin, I do like to remind everybody that we love to hear from you guys during the show. Whether you have a hot take, whether you have a burning question, we're all ears. The show is all about keeping the conversation lively, making sure your voice is part of the mix. Don't be shy to drop your thoughts in the chat. And you can always, if you really want a comment or question to get noticed, you can go ahead and use Super Chat. You can hit the $ below the chat box, send in your message, and it'll guaranteed to be featured on the show. It's a great way to support our channel. We're grateful for each and every one of you who joins us here. If Super Chat isn't really your thing, then you can always go ahead and use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and click on and send in your comments that way and send in your donations that way. Either or works, doesn't matter. And with that out of the way, we can go ahead and get into these power rankings for the WNBA. And there's been a lot of drama recently, between several teams. Chicago, they've been going bonkers since Olympic break, and not in a good way. I mean that in the absolute worst way. They seem to have collapsed over after the Paris Olympics. And the Sky, they recently lost 6 in a row, suffering Kennedy Carter, excuse me. I don't know how to pronounce her name, so excuse me if I completely messed that up. Her absence, suffering, well, not really suffering an injury, but being ill, according to injury reports, and already without Marina Mabrey due to the pre-deadline trade. So Chicago is still slotted into the number 8 seed by virtue of a 2-1 head-to-head tiebreaker over Atlanta. And, it's been a little bit the break, the break for the WNBA, like there's been teams that have been surging and then there's been teams that have sort of fell off. And Caitlyn has been surging, but Angel in the Sky sort of kind of, like not entirely, but they kind of fell off in terms of team record and in terms of being able to win. And it's really apparent. And like a week ago, it seemed as if only 2 teams were going to be in a contention for a playoff spot. But recent surges from other teams like the Wings and the Mystics, they added a lot more conflict between, the possible teams that could actually compete for a title this season that aren't, like maybe the Lynx or that aren't the Liberty or a team like the Mercury or something like that. Or maybe even an even more dangerous team like the Aces, honestly, now that I think about it. And like the way that this season has it could have been, I feel like the season could have been riddled with way less drama than what it needed to be, especially had a lot of these women, actually given Caitlyn the respect that she deserved and, actually just given them the praise, because right now it feels like a lot of them are going to have to eat their words, especially after this season, because it's like she's proving everybody wrong, and I'll get into that, but let's go ahead into the power rankings. So the worst team in the WNBA in the power rankings is the Los Angeles Sparks. They were previously ranked 12th last week, and now they're ranked 12th again. Like they've been the worst team, and the biggest reason why they are the worst team is because they did not expect to not have Cameron Brink out for the entire season. They drafted Cameron Brink with the expectation that she was going to have the same effect as Caitlin Clark has on the Fever, and she goes down with a season-ending injury, and there goes the season right there. So it's like that's really like the big and like the only reason why like the Sparks are so low on these power rankings. I think if Cameron Brink was on the roster, they would have definitely been in like at least maybe top 5, maybe top 6, something like that. They would have definitely been in a very prestigious spot, I would say. Next team on the Chicago Sky are what the heck just happened? What the heck just happened? Okay, I have no idea what just happened. I don't know what that was. Okay. Okay, I have no idea what just happened. My computer just... I don't know what happened. I genuinely have no idea what just happened, but my computer just went weird. I'm sorry for that. But anyways, let me go ahead and, try and continue with this list and hopefully not have any more problems. Hold on just 1 second. Let me see. What? I don't know what's going on. I checked before and there wasn't any problems. I don't know why now there's a problem. That's weird. All right. Regardless, the Chicago Sky, they were considered to be one of the they were thought of being like the better teams in the WNBA, and a lot of people, specifically Caitlyn fans, they really not Caitlyn fans, but Angel Reese fans, excuse me, they really sort of hoped that the team would be in a much better situation as opposed to where they're at now. They're in the number 9th in the power rankings, which it's not ideal if you are somebody like Chicago, especially with the start that you had in the season, winning games with Angel. Now it seems like they sort of been figured out and they've been on a recent losing streak, and now Angel's numbers are starting to look a little bit differently. A lot of people are starting to look at her numbers more like stat padding now as opposed to her putting up really good numbers, because now the Chicago Sky aren't winning nearly as many games, which is unfortunate if you're an Angel Reese fan. But again, this is honestly the way I see it. This is karma. Like, this is literally karma. This is what happens. And next team on this list, surprisingly, very, very surprisingly, is the Phoenix Mercury. They were ranked 7th in last week's rankings, and now they moved all the way down to 10, which is crazy, in my opinion. And it's really like Diana Taurasi really might have to eat her words, because right now she's third to last in the power rankings. Meanwhile, Caitlyn is nowhere near that. And it's like, not only that, but the Mercury are actually they're supposed to be a good team on paper, with Brittany Griner and Diana Taurasi and the rest of the other players that they have on the roster. But it doesn't look that way. So not a very good look for a lot of these, WNBA players that have sort of talked down on Caitlyn and have somehow managed to be ranked still below Caitlyn despite all of their experience in the WNBA. Yes, I'm going to be taking shots at a lot of these players, and don't think of it as a disrespectful way, because I really like watching the WNBA now. I just cannot, and I respect all of the players and their talents. I just don't like their attitude. And I mentioned this before when I was talking about Charles Barkley and his comments. Charles didn't like the female basketball's attitude either, and he's a fan of the WNBA. But I'm pretty sure it's okay if we don't like the attitude that they have towards a rookie. I think it's rather unfair and unneeded. But aside from that, the next team on this list is the Washington Mystics, and they were 10th last week, so they just moved up one in these power rankings for this week. So, I mean, not a really huge jump. They're not really that big of a team in the WNBA. Not many people really talk about them as much as they talk about some of these other teams. And, yeah, again, it's just it's all right. It's okay. Next team on this list is, that just because we're running out of time, is the Dallas Wings, and they were ranked 11th in the previous rankings, and now here they are all the way up at 8, so there's a surge for them. Good job. Now, next team is Atlanta, and Atlanta's they're sort of similar to their NBA team. They are in the mid-tier area of the WNBA, where it's they're really, really good and sometimes, and then in other times they're really, really bad. There's no real in between in them, and it's you win, you lose, you win, you lose, you win, you lose, you win, you lose, and it's mid 9 out of 10 times. And next team on this list is, let's see, what's the next team on this list? Okay, here we go. The next team on this list is the Connecticut Sun, and a little bit of a more local team than at least from my point of view, because I am going to school in Connecticut right now, and there's a lot of hype around the Connecticut Sun around here. They were ranked 3rd in the power rankings last week, and now they moved all the way down to 5th. But part of the reason why they moved all the way down was because of this woman right here. Yes, Caitlyn. She did it again. I remember a few days ago I did a segment on her breaking a record of having a 25-12 game, being the first ever WNBA player to have 2 back-to-back games like that. Now she already has more triple doubles than 99.63% of all WNBA players in the history of the sport. She's only played 34 games. 34 games, and she already has more triple doubles than 99.6. 0.6? You're telling me there's only 0.4 WNBA players that have more triple doubles than her? Huh? I need to find out who those 0.4 are, because that is ridiculously impressive. And it's not even 0.4. It's more accurately, it's 0.37 or something like that. And which is insane. But yes, she has 99.6% more triple doubles than all players in WNBA history. Not to mention the fact that now the Fever are winning. They are a competing team, and her ranking, the Fever being ranked 4th in the power rankings, are just proof of that. They made it to the playoffs already. They clinched the playoffs, and this is the first time that they've clinched the playoffs is in like 8 years. So the Caitlin Clark effect is real. It is real, and it is here. Now, the next team on the list, of course, Las Vegas Aces, a team that has A'ja Wilson, who's arguably the best player in the entire WNBA right now, as well as I don't want to mention Kelsey Plum, but I got to. Kelsey Plum. For those of you guys who are wondering why doesn't he like Kelsey Plum, I'm a Giants fan, and you guys can connect your dots there. But anyways, obviously having an MVP, the MVP of the WNBA, I really shouldn't even like say it's an MVP candidate because she's basically the MVP already. And a bunch of other supporting players, they are going to be the favorites going into the, like one of the favorites going into the postseason easily when you have the MVP and a solid team around it. Next is the Minnesota Lynx. And now, unlike the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Lynx are actually rather successful, and now they're actually gaining some traction for being rather successful. And by successful, I just mean they win consistently, and they've been winning consistently. And I can't say that, I can't really, obviously, like now I can't really use that joke as much because now the Timberwolves look like they are going to be contending teams in the future. But, finally, the Liberty, easily the best team in the entire WNBA. They've been the best team since the start of the season, so makes no mistake that, makes total sense that they are number one in the entire power rankings. They deserve it. Sabrina Ionescu, Brenna Stewart, all of those players, they are just phenomenal. And they have the best record in the entire WNBA for a reason. So that's all that I have for this. What is going on? Okay, Jesus. That is all that I have for this first segment. So now I will go ahead and go into the second segment where I talk about the 76ers seriously considering trying to relocate over to New Jersey. So I'm going to talk about that right after this short break. So be sure to stay tuned.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, I'm going to be talking about how the 76ers are seriously considering relocating over to New Jersey and the possibilities of that happen, why it's happening, why they're really considering it, and things like that. And before I begin with this segment, I do like to remind everybody that we do love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you have a burning question, a hot take for the game. We're all ears. And if you really want to make sure your comment or question gets noticed, go ahead and use Super Chat. Just hit the $ below the chat box. Send in your message, and it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's a great way to support our channel as well. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net, and send in your comment or donation that way. Either or really helps the show. And with that out of the way, we can go ahead and talk about the 76ers and their pending decision on whether or not they're going to relocate over to New Jersey. Now, the relocation isn't really like that big of a jump. Literally most of the time, like they're just going to be moving over to the city next to Philly, which is Camden, and that's across the lake from, you know, the border between Jersey and Pennsylvania, and that's really like where the relocation is going to happen. So according to this article, New Jersey has touted a possible $400 million in tax incentives in a pitch to lure the Sixers to Camden. So they're trying to sort of like let the Sixers know that, like, okay, we'll be able to pay off $4 million in tax, or we'll be able to give you $4 million for taxes if you were to come over here. So more than a month after Governor Phil Murphy announced New Jersey officials were speaking with the 76ers about moving the team to Camden, a new letter to the Sixers highlights the possibility of up to a $400 million in tax incentives should the move take place. And the quote, "We believe the Aspire program, a critical component of the ERA toolkit, could support 2 awards of up to $400 million of tax credits, one to support an arena and ancillary infrastructure, parking, open space, etc., and one to support significant residential, retail, and office development as part of a broader mixed-use neighborhood development strategy with potential to transform the surrounding areas of the city." Tim Sullivan, of the CEO of New Jersey Economic Development Authority, wrote in a letter to Tad Brown. This was the quote that he wrote. And not only that, there was also the CEO of Sixers owner Harris Blitzer saying, quote, "An Aspire award supporting development of arena, would be subject to a standard net benefit test, ensuring that New Jersey taxpayers are more than paid back for their investment via incremental state, county, and local tax revenues." Actually, wait, no, that was Governor Murphy, excuse me. I don't know why would they put his name before that quote? I apologize. But aside from that, Phil Murphy also confirmed in July that New Jersey officials were speaking with Sixers leadership about relocating to Wells Fargo Center. That was like the specific area in, Wells Fargo Center. Excuse me. I don't know what is up with me today. But aside from that, I mean, the Sixers and, like, you know, moving, it sounds like odd, right? Like, it sounds weird, the idea of the Philadelphia 76ers moving to a different state, let alone New Jersey. However, at the same time, when you think of it, like, geographically, like, from where they are and, like, where their fans are located and where they're going to be located next, it's not sort of that big of a deal, honestly. Most people in, like, the New Jersey area down there, like close to Camden, they all consider themselves Philly. They all want to be Philly, and they support Philly fans. A majority of them support Philly fans. A majority of them support the Eagles. A majority of them support the 76ers. Like, when you go, the difference between North Jersey and South Jersey is 9 times out of 10, like, you know, Knicks or 76ers. And, you know, Jersey being in the middle of that, it's like, if you're from the north, you're going to go for the team that's closest. But if you're from the south, you're going to go for the team that's closest to you, which is going to be Philly. So it's a pretty interesting little dynamic that's at play there. And a lot of people, like, you know, while there is some sort of confusion as to why they would move, geographically, like, you know, from where, like, just off of where they're located, somewhat makes sense. Again, somewhat makes sense. Now, this is obviously just horrible news for me, because that would mean that I would have to become a New Jersey 76ers fan if they change the name or whatever it is. I would have to, because, you know, I got to represent the teams that I like and the teams that are in my state, especially the teams that are in my state. Like, there's only really one New Jersey team, and that's the Devils. And, well, you can, if you want to count the Giants and the Jets, then you can go right ahead and count that in there too. But they don't have New Jersey written in their name. They have New York written on their name, despite the fact that they play in Jersey. So whether you want to call them the New Jersey Giants or whether you want to call them New Jersey Jets, it really doesn't matter. But I'm still going to rep them because, you know, they play in my state. So That's really like the only big downside. But the tax incentive, that's really what's sort of like eyeing the 76ers and their really big interest in now moving, because, if you're getting incentives, it's like that's free real estate. So they're obviously going to want to take advantage of that, and they would love to have those tax benefits, especially going into like the NBA season now with luxury taxes heavily influencing how teams are going to be constructed for the future of the NBA, and how teams are going to be constructed now with this season, given any kind of trades that need to be happening. That tax exemption, it's probably something that they would really like that they would, because who wouldn't want to get money for doing something that people want you to do? Like, who wouldn't want to do that? But that's my opinion. Again, that's more of a simple way of looking at it, obviously, but I like to simplify things a little bit for those of you guys who are a little bit more casual. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of the 76ers. Do you think they should move? Do you think they should stay? Do you think it doesn't matter where they go, they're still going to lose? Or some other question or some other thing that you have to say about this? Let me know what you guys have to say in the comments. But aside from that, we're going to go ahead and go into a break and then go into the third segment, which is going to talk about the Bucks possibly having one of the most underrated moves in the offseason. So I'll be right back after this short break talking about that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, I'm going to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks, and their offseason, and how they possibly had one of the most underrated offseason looks or offseason signings, free agent signings, in the entire offseason. So we're just going to go ahead and look at that and my opinions on that. So over the offseason, there were a lot of big moves. There were a lot of big trades. There were a lot of big names being bounced around. Klay Thompson being one of them, not to mention DeJounte Murray. And over in the Eastern Conference, Paul George going over to the 76ers. And the Knicks being able to acquire Mikal Bridges via trade, expanding their roster and officially turning them into a Villanova squad. As well as, what other big team in the West? And, I guess you could say, the Celtics being able to get Jason Tatum to re-sign, as well as Steph Curry being able to re-sign. All of these things, there's really big news that's going around in the NBA that sort of overshadows a lot of teams. And one of those teams that's being overshadowed with one of the moves that they've made in the offseason is Milwaukee. So obviously a year ago they traded Damian Lillard. They traded for Damian Lillard and created massive hype. However, their seasons recently haven't really been all that stellar, I guess you could say. They just came off of back-to-back first-round playoff exits, and in this most recent one, Giannis got hurt, and Damian Lillard also got hurt. And it sort of swept the Bucks under the radar. a little bit. And they've been under the radar for a majority of the season, especially when they hired Doc Rivers. And despite being under the radar, they were able to get such a huge deal out of signing Gary Trent Jr. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. How could signing Gary Trent Jr. be a good move in the offseason? Like, how could that even be considered as an underrated move? It's how they were able to get him and on the contract that they were able to get him on. Like, that's the big, like, underrated move that they've done in here. They were able to get a player and get him for a lot less value than a lot of other teams might market him as. So other teams, like I said before, other teams in the Eastern Conference, they made huge headlines when, like, 76ers, they got Paul George, then Mikal Bridges, when the Knicks added Mikal Bridges, as well as the Celtics being able to keep their core players, and the possibility of Bezos buying the Celtics, and, you know, started stirring up even more talks about the Eastern Conference, and it leaves Milwaukee in the dust, or like under the radar, if you guys want to say. Now, despite this lack of attention, Milwaukee was able to make the move of signing Gary Trent Jr. on a minimum contract. And that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. It's a minimum contract. And Gary Trent, securing him, arguably, like, that was the best signing of the offseason. You could argue that was the best signing of the offseason, because every contending team looks for a versatile wing that can play defense, that can shoot the ball, and can play respectable minutes in a very important postseason series. And I feel like that's sort of what you get when you have a player like Gary Trent on your roster. Like, Gary Trent obviously isn't one of, like, the big names that you would think of when you're talking about basketball. Like, when you immediately think of NBA player, you're not going to immediately think of Gary Trent Jr. I can guarantee you that's for sure. But aside from that, I mean, he's been pretty solid at least in the postseason. When in 2022, when he was in the postseason with Toronto, he played very, very solidly. And he averaged 15 points, shot 37% from the field, 33% from three, and 89% from the free throw line. And throughout the regular season, most of the regular season at least, he's been a very efficient and a very effective scorer. He's averaged 14 points per game for his career, and he averaged 16 specifically with his time on Toronto. So I really feel like, you know, his role with this team, there's no question what his role on this team is, and he's going to be able to fulfill it to a T. And again, probably, arguably, one of the most underrated moves, because a lot of teams look for a player like Gary Trent Jr., and being able to acquire a player like Gary Trent Jr. on a minimum contract is huge. And it's almost impossible, honestly. But the Bucks, they were able to pull it off. And, like, a lot of people and a lot of analysts, well, not analysts, but a lot of articles that I've seen, they're thinking that he could be the missing piece that this needs, this team needs, especially since they recently let one of their players walk in free agency over to the Detroit Pistons, and they lost their good shooter. But now that they have Trent, you know, they just replaced that shooting. And he's also only 25 years old, which also helps the team long term, because, you know, that way they'll be able to keep him long term and keep re-signing him if they want to. And he's averaged 16 points, 2.7 rebounds, 1.7 assists, 1.4 steals per game. He shot 38% from beyond the three-point line and has proven himself on both ends of the court. And like I said, he's going to replace Malik Beasley, and Malik Beasley was mainly known for his three-point shooting and his defense. And what does Gary Trent Jr. provide? Three-point shooting and defense. And one could argue that Gary Trent is better at, like, produces more than Malik Beasley. You could argue that, but again, that's like a completely different argument. Now, the Bucks, they faced an offseason challenge needing to add depth with only minimum contracts available, and they were able to do that with Gary Trent, and they also were able to get Taurean Prince, DeLon Wright, and which allows Doc Rivers to give more lineup options. Not that he's going to use them, but aside from that, I think that these moves, while they aren't big, are a little bit underrated. Again, just a little bit. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think that this move isn't really, like, it's not an underrated move? Do you guys think that it's not that big of a deal, that I'm just spitballing here, that maybe some other team had an even more underrated off-season experience that I completely overlooked and you guys know about and you guys would want to share? Maybe that's something that you guys want to talk about, but in my opinion, I think they had the most underrated offseason. But let me know what you guys think. So now we will go ahead and go into the fourth segment where I talk about why Shaquille O'Neal doesn't like Rudy Gobert from this article. And I'm going to read it from the article and I'm going to give my thoughts about it. Let me know what you guys think about it while I'm going over it. And I'll be right back after this short break, so be sure to stay tuned.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, I'm going to talk about I don't know if I can call it beef. I guess I could say that. I guess the beef between Shaq and Rudy Gobert, and sort of why Shaq doesn't really like Rudy Gobert all that much. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I saw an article about it, and I'm curious what the article has to say. And I'm also curious what you guys think about the article and what you guys think about Shaq's opinions on Rudy Gobert. Because a lot of people, they feel the same way about this article. They all feel that Shaq completely despises Rudy Gobert, that he just doesn't like it, that he's not a fan of his game. Shaq has said it several times that he's not a fan of his game and that he constantly critiques him. And Rudy Gobert, he's a 7-time member of NBA's all-defensive team. He's also won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards, is considered to be one of the NBA's best defenders ever. Especially like with those 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards, there aren't that many players in the NBA that have been able to acquire 4. And the fact that he has 4 immediately puts him in the conversation as being one of the best defenders ever. Now, Shaq, on the other hand, he's going to tell you completely different, that despite the fact that Rudy Gobert has 4 Defensive Player of the Years, that he is not a top defending center. Shaq is, this article continues, Shaq's one of Gobert's biggest haters in the world, that has a lot of them. The former Lakers legend has long been on a soapbox trashing the Minnesota Timberwolves center anytime he can. Of course, that naturally includes during the offseason when basketball critics have nothing else to do. On Wednesday, the Hall of Fame center was back at it, showing everyone just how much rent Gobert occupies inside Shaq's head. This is just an article, so, this is all coming from the article. This isn't from me, so just don't take it as this is my opinion. Take it as this is the article's opinion. So, who's the worst player in the NBA today? That's a question that could generate about 100 different answers, depending on which fan bases are going to be pulled. But Shaq answered Rudy Gobert. When asked who the worst player in the NBA is, Shaq did not hesitate and he quickly answered Rudy Gobert. And it seems like a complete joke, but O'Neal said this with a straight face. This should come as no surprise to Timberwolves fans who have long heard about the hate Shaq has in his heart for the 7'1" Frenchman. And, quote, Shaq said, Ben Simmons is another bum, but because you know why. I'm going to tell you why. If you sign a contract for $250 million, show me $250. There's a reason why I walk funny, why I can't turn my neck, and why I can't do it, because I played for 120 million. So you got guys like him that F the system over there making all this money and they can't play. So I don't respect guys like that. You know, every time I make these comments, people think I'm hating, but these are facts. You got teachers, you got firemen, you got doctors, you have real jobs, and you don't get paid blank. I'm not gonna finish most of because Shaq, he doesn't really have much of a filter. A lot of these athletes on podcasts, you don't really need filter on a podcast if one isn't required, but even the host couldn't contain his laughter. Like, most of the world, he realizes that the idea of Gobert being the NBA's worst player is an absolute joke. Shaq may not appreciate the 4-time All-NBA center of his contract, but he's still a pretty good player. And with that, I do agree with the article. Like, I do think that Shaq's reasoning for disliking Rudy Gobert is somewhat justified. The only reason why I say somewhat is because Rudy Gobert is out here making way more money than any center has ever been able to make before, like any other good center has been able to make before him. Because, remember when Rudy Gobert signed that massive contract and everybody laughed at the organization for signing him to that much, because it's like, that's a huge amount of money to give to somebody who doesn't have much of an offensive game. And because that he was given he was the most paid big man for a while, a lot of Shaq in particular, he did not agree with that, and he didn't really like it, because from his point of view, he was averaging 30 points per game, getting 12 rebounds per game, getting 2-3 blocks as well, and just being a dominant force in the NBA that nobody could stop. And he wasn't even paid that much money, which would, I think, if I was put in his situation, yes, I would definitely be upset that somebody else is getting more money, despite the fact that I know I'm better, But saying that that Rudy Gobert is the worst player in the NBA is just flat out disrespectful. Like, you can say that you don't like him. You can say that you're not a fan of his game. You don't think he's good. That's your opinion. You have the right to your own opinion, yes. But saying that he's the worst, I understand that's still your opinion, but there are numbers and stats and other components that can sort of prove that opinion of yours to be a little, I can't really say wrong, but rather questionable, I should say. Yeah, rather questionable, because at that point, if you have a very strong opinion about something like this, like Shaq does, but there are numbers that back the statement up to be a little bit wrong, or rather just not entirely accurate as what he's saying, then people might view it as hating. And that's sort of and which it kind of is, because it's there are so many other players in the NBA that don't provide nearly the same defensive impact that Rudy Gobert does, despite the fact that Rudy Gobert gets dunked on, despite the fact that Rudy Gobert is arguably a liability on offense. There is still a lot of good that he brings, despite the bad that he brings. And that certainly doesn't make him the worst player in the NBA. You can name so many players that Rudy Gobert is better than, and you could also name so many other players that are better than Rudy Gobert. Yes, but there's going to be more players not better than Rudy Gobert than there's going to be players that are better than Rudy Gobert. And saying that he's just bottom tier, literally the worst, is just, in my opinion, rather disrespectful. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think it's not disrespectful to say something like that? Do you guys think it's an opinion? And he has the right to that opinion, so he can say that? Or do you understand my perspective, where I'm yeah, you can have an opinion, but if it's not backed up by any stats, is it a really valid opinion? Let me know what you guys have to say about that in the comments. And the article continues. After all, Gobert earned that contract. If the Jazz hadn't signed Gobert to a 5-year, $205 million contract in 2020, several other teams would have. And that's how the world works. You're only worth as much as someone is willing to pay you. And the cold hard truth is Gobert is a very valuable player. The Timberwolves realize this, but that won't help Gobert earn any respect from Shaq. And the article finishes with that statement. So, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys think that the dislike towards Rudy Gobert is a little bit justified? Do you guys think that he's just the biggest hater? Do you guys think something completely differently? Do you guys agree with what he has to say? Or do you guys just think he's just flat out wrong and he's just being a little bit bitter given his highly touted resume? And honestly, I'm sure if every single one of us had his career and played in his situation, we would definitely we would feel a similar way. We would have a similar feeling of resentment towards a player that's making just a little bit more than what you feel like you should be making, just a little bit. Again, it's not like flat out jealousy. I mean, maybe it is, but again, not entirely. I mean, I would probably lose sleep over that. I mean, 28 points per game, and this guy who averages 15 and 16 or something like that gets paid way more than me? No, thank you. But again, let me know in the comments exactly what you guys have to say about that. But with that out of the way, we are out of time for this fourth segment. So now we will go ahead and go into the fifth segment where I talk about one player in particular who I feel did not deserve to win the MVP. And I'm obviously going to continue on with the list that I've been doing for the previous the previous 5 segments that I've been doing over these past few weeks. So if you guys are interested to figure out who I think didn't deserve the MVP, then go ahead and stay tuned after this short break for the 5th segment where I break it all down. And spoilers, the year is 1969. So I'll be right back. And we are back with the 5th segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this 5th segment, I am going to be talking about an NBA player who I feel did not deserve to win the MVP. And we are on the year 1969. But before I start, I do want to make a note that from before 1980, the MVP was determined by the NBA players themselves. Yes, before 1980, the players used to vote for the MVP. And this I forgot to mention this before when I went past the 80s and I went on and I moved on to the 70s. I completely forgot to mention it, but that should make things make more sense in the future, because in the future, I'm going to be talking about one player in particular, and he's going to have a lot of MVPs. And the reason why that player has MVPs is because the players voted for those MVPs. And player voting, like, these sort of segments that I'm going to show you now are sort of the reason why players don't vote for the MVP anymore. Because this one right here, this MVP, 1969, and the rest of the MVPs that I'm going to mention later are just flat out wrong in every single aspect possible, and you all will see exactly why. But I'm not going to spoil that. But just so you guys, just a little bit of foreshadowing. So, and sort of understanding why a lot of these players ended up winning an MVP in their time. It was mainly because players ultimately voted who they felt was the best player in the entire league. And excuse me. So that's a big reason why a lot of these players before the 80s ended up getting an MVP. And unfortunately, excuse me. Unfortunately, the 1969 MVP, Wes Unseld, is one of those players. Now, before I go into the segment, rest in peace, Wes Unseld. He died 4 years ago at the age of 70. A fantastic player, arguably the best player in the entire history of the Washington Wizards / Bullets franchise. He was that guy. Like, he was literally that guy. And Wes Unseld, so in 1969, the biggest reason why Wes Unseld won the MVP, he really only had two reasons. Because Wes Unseld in 1969 gets made fun of for being considered as the worst MVP in the history of basketball. And I respect his game and all that. I'm not saying that. Everybody else is saying that. But when you look at the stats that he averaged in the season, then you're really going to question, like, how on earth did he win the MVP? But two reasons why he won the MVP. Two really big reasons. He was a rookie, and the team was the best team in the NBA. Now, context is everything. So, the Bullets, before they drafted Wes Unseld, they were the worst team in the NBA. By far the worst. Then, they draft Wes Unseld and automatically become the best team in the NBA. And you would think that, like, okay, obviously it's the rookie. Like, yes, it makes sense. Like, when you're thinking of value and you're thinking of, like, a player that brings value, they brought a rookie, and that rookie turned the team. That one rookie turned the team into the best team in the NBA. That is incredibly valuable, and that gives you a huge boost in MVP voting. However, you immediately lose your edge on MVP voting. Well, or let me be more specific. Wes Unseld, he loses his edge on the MVP when you look at his numbers. He only averaged 14 points, 18 rebounds, 3 assists on 48% shooting. Now, I know exactly what you guys are thinking. That is not MVP numbers. The 18 rebounds, yeah, definitely. Those are MVP numbers. But the 14 points, that kind of production was MVP worthy. Not to mention just the 3 assists. Like, Like, it brings a lot of question, and a lot of people really question this MVP and why he was even selected to be an MVP. Like, a lot of people, this is why he was questioned for being an MVP, because his production was so low. And even then, like, the next year, that when he averaged 16 points per game, so more than his 14 points per game that he averaged, he was 8th in the MVP voting. Like, he wasn't even in the top 5 for MVP voting. And you can argue that he had an even better season in 1969 and 1970. And on top of that, he also wasn't an all-star in that year. So he had a better sophomore season, yet was recognized more for his rookie season, despite the fact that that wasn't even either his best season or that it wasn't it didn't make any sense. It really genuinely did not make any sense how he won the MVP when you just look at the numbers alone, like looking at just the numbers alone. And like, again, it's like I said before, players ended up voting for the MVP. And maybe letting the players vote for the MVP isn't really the best idea. And that's probably why they ended up removing this. But this year, it was, to Wes Unsell's defense, it was a pretty weak year for MVP candidates. But if I were to give the MVP to anyone, I'd probably give it to Willis Reed, who I mentioned in the previous podcast before, who I said didn't deserve the MVP in 1970. But he did deserve the MVP in 1969 when Wes Unseld was in the front running. Because, like I mentioned in the previous podcast, Willis averaged the same amount of numbers that he averaged in the year that he won the MVP, except you could argue better. 21, 15, and 2 with the best advanced stats for the time, and only 3 fewer wins than Wes Unseld's team. So it's not even like the win difference was all that staggering between Willis Reed's team and Wes Unseld's team. But the stats, they are staggering. I mean, 21 points compared to 14 points, as well as 15 rebounds compared to 18 rebounds. I mean, I would much rather take the 21 points and 15 rebounds than the 14 points and the 18 rebounds. That's just my opinion. Because, I mean, you get much more scoring production while at the same time still being able to get rebounds at an efficient rate. Like, it's a 3 rebound difference. I'm not going to cry about a 3 rebound difference. Now, if it was like maybe a 4 or a 5, then now we're talking. But like a 3 rebound difference, it's not that, in my opinion, I don't think it's that big of a deal. And again, you could argue that this is one of the worst MVPs. Let me know in the comments what you guys think of that. Like, do you think that Wes Unseld is the worst MVP ever? Or like, do you think that there's somebody else that put up worse MVP numbers than Wes Unseld? Because from a statistical standpoint, like from a box score perspective, I don't think there are many players in the NBA that would really be considered as like a bad MVP as quickly as people will consider Wes Unseld as a bad MVP. And let me know what you guys think of the context. Do you guys think that, the context should have mattered in this instance, or do you guys think that did you think that the players voted right? Did you think that the players voted incorrect? And again, Willis Reed, the only difference was 3 fewer wins. And honestly, like if it's 3 fewer wins, I don't think it's that big of a deal. I really don't. Like we've seen second seeded players win the MVP, despite the fact that maybe a player on the 1 seed is doing just as good or something like that. And it's a very sad trend that happened a lot in the NBA for this time because, a lot of players, they saw value in the winning and they would often vote for the best player on the best team because that's how you determine value. And there's logic behind that for sure. Without a doubt, there is 100% logic behind that. However, when you're like putting it into the practice, it doesn't really seem like there's much logic behind it, especially when you look at the numbers like this. And the rest of the MVP segments that I have lined up, they're all going to be as blasphemous as this one right here. They're all going to be as blasphemous. And you guys, actually, you know what? You guys might actually get sick of me if I do the segment over and over and over again. So I might just do it in one big segment because back then, like in the early 60s, Bill Russell won a lot of MVPs that he shouldn't have. Just a little bit of a spoiler there. So, and, I'll obviously talk about those in the future, but this was a big reason as to why the rule was changed so that way the analysts would vote as opposed to the players, and the players would stop voting because, they needed to put a stop to that nonsense because the MVP awards that Bill Russell was winning that Wilt Chamberlain wasn't winning is absurd. Like, you guys are going to absolutely, like, flip your everything when you realize just how many MVPs Bill Russell has over certain players who flat out averaged better everything than him. And that's all that I'm really going to spoil about that in the fewer segments. But I sort of just needed the guys who didn't know anything about the 60s, because I mean there's a lot of people who don't know anything about the 60s, to sort of understand why this rule was changed and where this trend was sort of coming from and how this trend sort of started, because it didn't start with Wes. It started way before that. So, still something to think about though. But that's all I have for this final segment, and that's it for the show. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And as usual, we love to hear what you guys have to say during the show, whether you have a hot take or a burning question. We are all ears. And if you really want a comment or question to get noticed, you can always just hit Super Chat. Just click the $ below the chat box, send in your message, and it's guaranteed to get featured on the show. It's a great way to support our channel. And if Super Chat isn't really your thing, you can always use the link displayed below the ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. That really helps the show, and that could also you can get your comments or questions noticed that way and get your donations in that way as well. So that's another ulterior for you guys in case you don't like Super Chat. So that's all that I have for you guys today. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.